It was just another ordinary day for most people around the world. People were waking up, heading to work, or going about their daily routines. But when the clock stopped, everything changed. The first sign of something wrong came when the clocks on smartphones blinked 12 o'clock. The time wasn't just wrong, it had frozen. Panic didn't immediately set in, but confusion spread like wildfire as people checked their watches, computers, and phones. Each one displayed the same time, all stuck at 12 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. For some, it was a glitch, a brief technical issue. But as minutes passed, it became clear that this wasn't a simple malfunction. People reached for their computers, expecting them to show the correct time, but they were just as frozen. Radios, televisions, and even satellite signals went silent, as if the entire planet was holding its breath. The world's clocks, precise, reliable, and constant, were now useless. The first theories began to circulate. Perhaps a solar flare had disrupted communication systems. Maybe there was some global system failure, like a cascading crash in timekeeping servers. But none of these theories explained the absolute and eerie stillness of time itself. Something had happened, something beyond human comprehension. Across cities, officials scrambled to understand the situation. By the time it hit noon, global leaders were in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to get in touch with one another. But phone lines were down. Even satellite systems, which usually remained immune to the Earth's atmosphere, were useless. GPS systems blinked out, and the digital clocks inside military bases across the world froze. There was no communication, no news, no answers. As hours passed, the atmosphere became thicker with uncertainty. People stayed where they were, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No news reports, no official statements. It was as though the world had simply lost track of time. For a few, the situation was terrifying. For others, it was simply incomprehensible. The world, for the first time in modern history, had come to a standstill. And then, it happened. On the remote continent of Antarctica, deep in the cold, desolate terrain of Hallberg Station, a small and nearly forgotten outpost, a single clock continued to tick, its hands moving with a quiet, unfaltering rhythm. It was the only timepiece in the world still functioning. Unbeknownst to the outside world, this clock had become humanity's last link to time. The researchers stationed there, initially unaware of the global panic, noticed the anomaly only when they looked up from their work. Dr. Elena Voss, head of the small research team, was the first to spot it. The clock, an old analog model that had long since been relegated to a corner of the station, ticked away on the wall. And with each passing second, Elena felt a strange sense of dread. "How is this possible?" she muttered to herself. The clock continued to tick, its hands moving precisely in rhythm with time, untouched by whatever global force had frozen the world. It wasn't just an anomaly, it was something more. A small island of normalcy in an ocean of chaos. Something was wrong, but it was clear that Hallberg Station was the only place in the world where time still mattered. Dr. Elena Voss stared at the clock, transfixed by its steady ticking. The station was eerily quiet. There were no buzzing alerts, no usual chatter among the researchers, just the sound of that single ticking clock. At first, Elena thought it was a fluke, maybe a glitch, a mechanical oddity. But as she looked closer, she realized that every other device in the room was frozen. Her computer, which should have been running climate simulations, was blank. The digital weather station displayed only the word ERR, and yet the clock continued without a pause. "Is anyone else seeing this?" Elena called out, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. A few of her colleagues, who had been similarly absorbed in their work, glanced up. Alex, a young climatologist, was the first to approach the wall. He stood in front of the clock, examining it closely. "I don't get it," he said, a frown spreading across his face. "This shouldn't be possible. The entire continent's on backup power, and we're disconnected from the grid. Why is this clock still running?" Elena wasn't sure, but she felt a growing sense of dread. The more she thought about it, the less sense it made. They were in Antarctica, far from any major city or power source. The weather was brutal, and the station was isolated, hardly the kind of place to find a working timepiece when the rest of the world had lost track of time. It didn't take long for the rest of the team to gather around. Two of the researchers, Clara and Jamal, quickly joined the group, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern. They all stood in front of the old wall clock, their breaths visible in the freezing air of the station. "This doesn't make sense," Clara said, her voice tight. "We've been cut off. No phone, no satellite, no nothing. It's as if the entire world stopped, except for this." Elena nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. It's not just that everything stopped. Everything froze. Communications are down. Even the satellites aren't transmitting. But the clock, it's like it's immune to whatever's happened. Jamal, the team's engineer, took out his phone and tried to dial out, but of course it didn't work. He cursed softly under his breath. "The satellites have gone dark. I tried to contact the mainland earlier. Nothing. A power grid's stable here, but we're completely cut off from everything else." Elena rubbed her temples. This wasn't just a technical failure. It was something far bigger. Something that couldn't be explained away by faulty systems or bad weather. There was no way a single clock, old, mechanical, and hardly significant, should be the only thing working when everything else had failed. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, but there was no signal. She opened the message, which was a strange, cryptic string of symbols, a mix of letters and numbers that didn't make sense. "What is this?" Elena muttered, turning the phone over in her hands. Clara leaned in, her face pale. "It's like a code, a message." "That's impossible," Jamal said, stepping back. "There's no way to transmit anything from here without the satellites." The realization hit Elena hard. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this, the clock was somehow involved. She didn't know how or why, but something in the station was connected to the anomaly. Something that had survived the freeze, and now they were all linked to it. Elena glanced once more at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking away in the stillness of the frozen world. "We need to figure out what's going on," she said, her voice steady now. "Because whatever this is, it's bigger than anything we've ever faced." The hours dragged on in Hallberg Station, each one heavier than the last. The team continued to sit in uneasy silence, each member trying to process the impossible situation. Dr. Elena Voss stood by the clock, staring at its steady tick, while her colleagues debated what could have caused the global disaster. The stillness in the room was only broken by the sound of the clock's ticking and the occasional rattle of the station's aging infrastructure. But outside, the world was in chaos. News outlets from every corner of the globe were reporting the same unthinkable event. Every clock, every device, every piece of technology linked to time had stopped working. The media was scrambling for answers, but no one had any. In cities across the world, chaos reigned. Traffic jams clogged streets, businesses ground to a halt, and airplanes sat idly on runways, unable to take off without their automated systems. The financial markets had frozen in time, and people everywhere were panicking, unsure of what had happened or how to fix it. It wasn't just a malfunction. It was as though time itself had been taken from them. Governments quickly declared states of emergency. Scientists, technologists, and military experts all rushed to figure out the cause. Every agency scrambled to send teams into the field, and every nation turned its attention to one strange anomaly. Hallberg Station, the last known location where time still moved. Elena and her team had no way of knowing that the world's leaders were already planning a rescue operation. They were completely isolated, no longer able to communicate with the outside world. The station's communication systems were useless, and the radio was silent. But in the global chaos, one thing became clear. Hallberg Station had become humanity's last hope. Meanwhile, In the control rooms of various world governments, the urgency was palpable. International response teams were being assembled, and the decision was made to send a joint task force to Antarctica. Experts in everything from timekeeping to satellite technology to military strategy would converge on the remote research station. They needed to secure Hallberg Station, protect the clock, and, above all, understand why it was the only thing that had survived the global freeze. The world was watching as these teams were mobilized. People on every continent were glued to their screens, waiting for any sign of what was happening. They needed answers, and fast. Back in Antarctica, Elena was unaware of the global storm brewing. All she could focus on was the cold, unrelenting ticking of the clock and the growing mystery surrounding it. Whatever was happening, it was clear that Hallberg Station was at the center of it. As she looked out the small window of the station, she could see nothing but the endless stretch of white snow. The harsh winds howled outside, but inside the station, it was warm. Too warm, she thought. The warmth felt unnatural, as if the station itself was insulated from the outside world in ways they hadn't understood before, and the clock, always ticking, never paused. Elena stood there, her eyes fixed on the clock, her thoughts racing. What did this mean for the world? What did it mean for them? The clock had become a symbol of humanity's last connection to time, and now it was the key to everything. "We need to protect it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening, the clock is the answer. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Her team nodded in agreement. The weight of the responsibility was enormous, but they knew what they had to do. As the rescue teams prepared to leave for the isolated continent, the world held its breath. The race to save time had begun, and it all hinged on a single clock, ticking away in the heart of Antarctica. The arrival of the international team at Hallberg Station was a moment of eerie quiet. The winds howled outside, as they always did in Antarctica. But within the station, there was a tense stillness. As the doors to the station creaked open, and the team filed inside, Elena and her colleagues greeted them with a mixture of apprehension and relief. They had known help was coming, but the weight of what they were dealing with now felt more real than ever. The team consisted of experts from every field: military personnel, engineers, scientists, and most importantly, Thomas Ketteridge, an elderly clockmaker, brought in because of his knowledge of timepieces. He was the one who had been assigned to inspect the mysterious clock that had become the center of it all. As Ketteridge shuffled into the main room of the station, his silver hair and weathered face gave him an air of quiet authority. He seemed out of place in the cold, sterile station, his fingers lightly touching the wall near the clock, as if sensing something only he could feel. "This is the one, I assume?" Ketteridge asked. His voice steadied, but filled with something Elena couldn't quite place. Elena nodded. "Yes, this is the only clock still working in the world." He leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying the old timepiece. There was something mesmerizing in the way he looked at it, almost reverential, as if the clock wasn't just a machine, but a living thing. "I built this clock, you know," Ketteridge said suddenly, looking at Elena. His words carried an air of finality, but they also seemed to carry weight, like a secret he had long kept hidden. Elena blinked in surprise. "You built it?" "Yes," Ketteridge replied, nodding slowly. "My grandfather did, to be precise. It was part of a project he worked on in the late 1940s. He was an engineer, a brilliant one. He designed this clock as a piece of art, not just a timepiece. He crafted it to withstand everything: storms, floods, earthquakes, even time itself." The air in the room felt thicker now, as if the full weight of his words had begun to sink in. The team gathered around, listening closely as Ketteridge continued. "The clock was built with a special alloy, one that is resistant to time-based decay. It's not just a clock, it's a machine that stands outside the normal flow of time," he explained. "That's why it hasn't stopped. It was designed not to." Alina's mind raced. A clock that could withstand time itself. It seemed impossible, yet here it was. But how? She asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. Why would your grandfather, why would anyone, build something like that? Ketteridge hesitated before speaking again. I don't know everything, but my grandfather had a theory. He believed that one day, time would break. Not in the way we think. No catastrophic event or disaster, but an event that would fracture reality itself. He thought that if the world ever found itself on the brink of disaster, this clock would be the only thing left to remind humanity of time, of normalcy. It was a failsafe, in case something unimaginable ever occurred. The words hung in the air like a heavy mist. Alina felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the enormity of what Ketteridge had just said. If what he was suggesting was true, the freeze in time wasn't just a freak occurrence. It was planned, or at least expected. We need to figure out what caused this, Alina said, her voice trembling despite her resolve. Whatever's happening, it's connected to the clock, and we need to understand it before it's too late. Ketteridge nodded grimly. Your grandfather's clock isn't just a timepiece, Alina. It's a key, and what lies beneath the ice might be the lock. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Alina realized then that they weren't just solving a mystery. They were facing something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. The clock wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a part of something that spanned time itself. The discovery that the clock was more than just a timepiece had shifted the entire focus of the team's investigation. Alina felt the weight of Ketteridge's words press down on her. This wasn't just about a global anomaly. It was about something much larger, something that had been hidden beneath the ice for decades, waiting to be uncovered. The clock was not merely the last functioning artifact of time. It was connected to something deep within Antarctica, beneath layers of ice that had kept it hidden for centuries. Determined to find answers, Alina and her team moved swiftly. The military had set up a perimeter around Hallberg Station, and a specialized crew was already preparing to embark on an expedition to investigate what lay beneath the ice. The signals they had detected earlier were growing stronger, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from deep below the station, vibrating with an eerie consistency. It was almost as if the pulse was synchronized with the ticking of the clock itself. Jamal, the engineer, had been the first to notice the anomaly. He had rechecked the instruments multiple times, each reading pointing toward the same conclusion. There was something beneath the ice, a structure, perhaps an ancient facility, that was emitting a signal. The same signal that had caused all global systems to fail, and yet somehow left the clock at Hallberg Station untouched. We've got to get down there, Jamal said, his voice filled with urgency as he looked at the others. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a mechanical failure. It's a pulse. Then we're going after it, Alina replied, her resolve hardening. If the clock is connected to whatever is happening, we need to understand the source of this pulse before it's too late. The team prepared their gear for the long journey. The harsh, unforgiving environment of Antarctica meant they would have to rely on their training and equipment to survive. The rescue team set out in specially designed snowmobiles, driving across the vast, unbroken expanse of white ice. The only sounds were the howl of the wind and the hum of the snowmobile's engines. The pulse grew stronger as they ventured farther from the station, drawing them closer to its source. After several hours of treacherous travel, the team reached the location where the signal was strongest. The ground beneath them was oddly smooth, as though shaped by something other than natural forces. Jamal quickly set up his seismic equipment, his brow furrowing as he studied the readings. It's here, he said, looking up at the team. But there's something strange. The pulse is coming from deep below. Whatever's down there, it's emitting some kind of low-frequency signal. It's like it's been buried on purpose. They began drilling, the deep, mechanical sound of the drills cutting through the ice. Each twist of the drill seemed to echo through the quiet alien landscape. As the team dug deeper, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were unlocking something that had been sealed away for a reason. As the drill finally broke through a thick layer of ice, the ground gave way, revealing an entrance. It wasn't natural. Nothing about it was. The opening was perfectly round, the edges smooth and almost metallic. Alina felt a shiver of unease crawl up her spine. "It's a door," Ketteridge said, his voice low and awed. "But who built this, and why?" The group gathered around the entrance, unsure of what they would find. The pulse was louder now, vibrating in their bones. Whatever was inside, they were about to uncover the secret that had kept the world in stasis, and the clock in Hallberg Station still ticking. As the door opened with a loud groan, revealing what lay within, Alina took a deep breath. They were no longer just uncovering the past. They were stepping into something that could change everything. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passageway carved into the ice. It was unlike anything Alina had ever seen. The walls were smooth, almost too smooth to be natural, with strange symbols etched into the surfaces. The air inside was cold and dry, but there was something else, a subtle hum, like an energy field that seemed to reverberate through the walls. "Where are we?" Clara asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Alina's mind raced. This didn't look like anything they had expected. It wasn't just a buried facility or a forgotten laboratory. It felt ancient, as though it had been built by a civilization that predated human history. The passage led deeper, winding into the heart of the ice. The signal, the same rhythmic pulse that had led them here, was stronger now, vibrating in the air like an electric charge. Ketteridge was the first to step forward, his old eyes scanning the carvings on the walls. "These symbols, they're not like anything I've ever seen. They seem almost otherworldly." Jamal examined the walls more closely. "This looks like it was made intentionally, by someone or something that had advanced technology. But why hide it here, beneath layers of ice?" The team pressed forward, the passage growing colder the deeper they went. The walls seemed to pulse in time with the signal. The further they ventured, the more Alina felt the weight of what they were uncovering. It was as if they were trespassing in a place meant to remain undisturbed, a place that had been frozen in time for a reason. Finally, they reached a vast chamber, its ceiling stretching high above them, filled with rows of what appeared to be towering stone columns. The chamber seemed to hum with energy, and at its center stood a massive, circular platform. Atop the platform lay a large crystalline structure, glowing faintly with a strange, pulsing light. It was almost like a beacon, sending out signals into the unknown. "This is it," Alina whispered. "This is the source of the pulse." The air in the room seemed to thicken as they approached the platform. The hum grew louder, vibrating through their bones. Ketteridge stepped closer to the crystalline structure, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch it. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "This isn't just a device. This is what's keeping the clock running. It's a time anchor." "A time anchor?" Alina asked, her voice rising with disbelief. Ketteridge nodded. "This thing, whatever it is, controls time itself. It stabilizes the flow of time, like a dam holding back a river. Your grandfather must have known about it, which is why he built the clock to withstand its effects. If the pulse ever became unstable, the clock would be the only thing left to anchor time." As Alina absorbed the magnitude of Ketteridge's words, she began to realize the true danger of what they had discovered. This wasn't just an ancient machine. It was a relic from an unknown civilization, and it was keeping the very fabric of time from unraveling. But what would happen if the pulse failed? What would happen if the time anchor broke? The entire world had frozen. The clock in Hallberg Station was the only thing keeping time intact. But why? And for how long? Just then, the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and the pulsing light of the crystalline structure intensified. Alina looked around, her heart pounding. Something was shifting. Something was waking up. "We need to figure out how to control this," Alina said urgently, "before it's too late." Ketteridge's eyes widened. "We don't know how to control it. This technology is far beyond us, It's far beyond anything we've ever understood." The room trembled again, this time more violently. The team braced themselves, realizing that the moment they had feared was fast approaching. The clock in Halberg Station was only the beginning. If the time anchor collapsed, the consequences would be unimaginable. The trembling intensified, shaking the floor beneath their feet and sending a cascade of ice dust from the high ceiling. Alina's heart raced as the pulsating light of the crystalline structure flickered, its glow now erratic and unstable. It was as though the entire chamber was alive, reacting to something they couldn't understand, something they hadn't yet triggered, but were on the brink of disturbing. "Everyone, back up," Alina shouted, her voice cutting through the growing rumble of the chamber. The team instinctively retreated, but the floor beneath them seemed to pulse with each heartbeat of the crystalline core, pushing them back toward the walls. "Wait, the signal. It's coming faster," Jamal yelled over the noise, his hands frantically scanning the readings on his equipment. "The frequency's changing. It's like it's amplifying." Ketteridge, still frozen in place near the platform, looked up, his eyes wide with realization. It's not just amplifying. It's collapsing. The time anchor is destabilizing. The pulse, it's becoming too strong to contain. Alina's stomach dropped. If the anchor collapsed completely, the time flow that had been holding the world together would shatter. The world outside would cease to exist in any meaningful way. Time itself would unravel. "We need to stop it," Alina said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "We have to stabilize it before it's too late." "But how?" Ketteridge's words echoed in her mind. "We don't know how to control it. This technology is far beyond us." The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. No one here had the knowledge to fix this. Not even Ketteridge, a clockmaker who had spent his life studying time, could offer a solution. Suddenly, the room grew deathly silent. The humming stopped. For one fleeting moment, it seemed as though the entire chamber was holding its breath. Then the lights flickered, and everything plunged into darkness. "Power's gone," Jamal shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "This isn't just the lights, it's the entire system. We've lost control of everything." Alina fumbled for her flashlight, shining it onto the crystalline structure. The glow of the crystal had completely faded, and in its place was an eerie, oppressive blackness. The signal was gone. "Is it over?" Clara asked, fear creeping into her voice as she looked around the dark chamber. "No," Alina said, her voice tight. "It's just begun." The sudden silence was broken by a distant sound. At first, it was faint, just a low, growling hum, but as the seconds passed, it grew louder. It wasn't coming from the time anchor. It was coming from the walls themselves. The stone-like surface of the passage had started to vibrate in tune with the pulse they had been tracking. The walls began to crack, small fractures appearing along the surface, as though they were being torn apart by an invisible force. "Get out now," Alina commanded, snapping the team into action. They scrambled toward the exit, their flashlights illuminating the tunnel ahead. The vibrations grew more violent, and Alina could feel the ground beneath her feet becoming unstable. It was like the entire chamber was coming undone. As they rushed back toward the entrance, Alina couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her gut. The time anchor wasn't just a machine. It was a prison, a mechanism designed to hold time in place. But if it had failed, if the pulse was truly collapsing, the world they knew would soon be gone, erased from existence. There was no way to stop it, no way to fix it. All they could do was run, and hope that the world wasn't already lost. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Alina and her team raced through the darkened passage, their breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. The walls around them groaned, cracking like thunder as the entire structure seemed to shift, as though it were breaking apart. The sound of the growing hum from deep within the ice reverberated through the air, filling their minds with a sense of impending doom. "Faster," Alina shouted, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to get out now." The tunnel behind them seemed to be closing in, the vibrations growing stronger, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Each step they took was harder than the last, the ground shaking with more force. The team's progress slowed, and their hearts pounded in their chests, the terrifying realization settling in that they might not make it out alive. "We're almost there," Jamal called, his voice laced with fear as he glanced over his shoulder. His eyes widened. "Look out!" A massive crack split across the tunnel floor, creating a jagged fissure that began to widen, swallowing the ground beneath them. Elena barely had time to react, leaping to one side as the ice beneath her feet crumbled, sending debris crashing into the cavern below. They scrambled, pulling themselves up onto the edges of the tunnel, struggling to stay clear of the ever-expanding chasm. The vibrations were almost unbearable now, and the hum of the collapsing time anchor was louder than ever. Elena could feel the weight of the situation closing in. If they didn't escape soon, there might be no world left to save. "We can't keep running forever," Clara gasped, barely keeping up as she stumbled. "What if we're too late?" Elena turned to her, desperation flashing in her eyes. "We have to try. We're the only ones who can stop it." The exit was in sight, just beyond the final stretch of the tunnel, but as they pushed forward, the entire passage lurched violently, sending them stumbling to the ground. A massive rumble shook the entire structure as the ice around them cracked further, more debris falling from the ceiling. Time was running out. Every moment counted. Finally, they reached the open chamber where the door had originally opened. The air was thick with tension, the cold biting at their skin as they scrambled outside, half blinded by the snowstorm raging just beyond the entrance. Elena looked around, her eyes searching for the team, but they were too close to the epicenter of the destruction. The storm's intensity had risen, and the winds whipped around them, making it nearly impossible to hear each other. Ketteridge, panting heavily, turned to her, his expression grim. "It's over. The time anchor's collapse is irreversible now." Elena shook her head. "No, we can't let it be. There has to be something we can do." But as she looked up at the blackened sky, the pulse of time, a final, resounding hum, rang through the air, louder than ever. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the universe itself pressing down on her. She understood now. The time anchor had never been meant to be fixed. It had been a fail-safe, a containment that had kept the fabric of time intact for as long as it could. But now it was collapsing, and there was no stopping it. In that final moment, as everything began to unravel around them, Elena made her peace with the inevitability of it all. The clock at Halberg Station, the beacon of humanity's last connection to time, had served its purpose. And now, it was time for the world to face what came next. As the final pulse of the time anchor echoed across the frozen landscape, the earth stilled. The world paused. And then, nothing.